The way that licensed video games were treated back in 2002 was far different than how they are today. Nowadays, the trend is to make games based off of the universe or property itself, rather than having a one-to-one movie-to-video game correlation. This used to not be the case. If a big blockbuster was out, you could bet your behind that a video game equivalent was on store shelves as well. The major problem with this approach is that your average game might take quite a bit longer to develop than your average movie, and a lot of these games were rushed out in order to meet the demand that the new movie would create. That's why there's always a buzz around good movie tie-in games. They're usually the exception and not the rule. If my experiences browsing Reddit are to be believed, then The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers on the PS2 is one of those games. I haven't played it myself until this video, so let's see how it plays. EA, huh? It's weird jumping back into an era where EA wasn't universally disliked. Let's not get caught up on that fact, though. Once we get through the opening logos, we are treated with an introduction to the Lord of the Rings mythos with some footage from the movies themselves. I'm not going to show any of that footage here due to potential copyright concerns, but just note that this game is filled with different clips from the movie. After the brief introduction, we are thrust right into combat. For this first level, you'll play as Isildur fighting off orcs in an attempt to claim and destroy the One Ring. If you're a fan of the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy, you may think that this is a strange place to start, given that this sequence takes place during the Fellowship of the Ring and not during the Two Towers. And yeah, you're right. In fact, this game is almost a clean split of being half based on scenes from the Fellowship of the Ring and half content from the Two Towers. It obviously holds onto the Two Towers name because of the fact that this game's release date more closely coincides with the Two Towers movie. But don't be fooled into thinking that the Fellowship of the Ring scenes are thrown in here as an afterthought. They are very much a complete and integral part of this game. As we all know, once Isildur and company win the battle, he is given the opportunity to destroy the One Ring and save the day. But sadly, the hearts of men are easily corrupted, and he opts to let the ring live. We are then placed into the role of Isildur's son, Aragorn, where he attempts to rectify his father's mistake by guiding the One Ring's current owner, Frodo Baggins, to the fiery volcanoes of Mount Doom, where he can destroy the ring forever. Well, we aren't going to see Mount Doom in this game, however, that's for the sequel, but we can get halfway there at least. Aragorn isn't the only character that you can play as on your adventure. You can also play as Legolas, the swift rogue of the bunch, and Gimli, the brutish and slow tank. Aragorn fits somewhere in the middle of these two in terms of how he plays as a much more balanced warrior. I guess this is a good time to start talking about the combat, because it's definitely the meat of this game. Not only is it the meat of the game, it's actually the bone and skins too, and all the organs. This game is nearly 100% combat. No puzzle solving or conversation sequences to break things up. It's straight up action and the cutscenes that come in between. It's a good thing then that the combat manages to stay fresh, with the game's robust moveset, enemy variety, and objectives. You have your standard light and heavy attacks, which are usually to be expected in a game such as this. Mixing these two types of attacks is how you develop most of your combos throughout the game. You also have access to a push, where you could knock your enemies back and get them off guard. My favorite of the melee attacks has got to be the finisher though. There is a button dedicated to delivering a downward thrust into a downed enemy, which will kill them all for good. These moves alone provide enough options for you to approach fights, but are expanded upon even further later in the game as you learn new abilities. Attacking enemies doesn't quite have the amount of weight I feel like it should have, but the animations are entertaining enough that I was never bored with it during my playthrough. The enemy variety will force you into using specific types of moves, which helps prevent monotony with the sheer waves of enemies that get set on you. Shielded enemies will require a heavy strike, more dexterous enemies will require you to knock them down beforehand, and so on. What's great is how this game allows you to utilize the environment as a combat tool as well. Enemies will respond to environmental hazards exactly as you do. This allows you to push them down large holes, knock them into a fire, or even set off explosives that are nearby. They also take friendly fire from other attacking baddies, so if you position a foe between yourself and their line of archers, you might get some good results. And definitely be careful if you're wading through water or mud, as your movement speed will be dramatically decreased. When you're not killing wave after wave of orc, the game will integrate some other combat-themed objective to keep your mind on. There's a great range of these that they use, such as kicking down ladders that invading orcs are climbing on, or lighting your torch to scare off a ring wraith. What's most impressive about these objectives is how well contextualized they feel to the game's controls. Both of the examples I just provided could have easily been handled by a QTE-style button prompt, but they instead opt to use your default control scheme. Knocking down the ladders at Helm's Deep is done with the same knockback attack you use against your enemies, and lighting your torch is done by swinging your torch at the fire with your heavy attack button. It's a small touch, but it helps make you feel like the things that you're doing are congruent with each other, rather than having additional stuff loaded on top of the base combat. Outside of the combat, the game is segmented into multiple different levels that you access via a menu. Like I mentioned before, the first half of these levels are based on the Fellowship of the Ring, and the second half is based on the Two Towers. What's cool is that you can really feel a difference between the Fellowship levels and the Two Towers levels. The Fellowship levels are structured in such a way that they are much more like a linear adventure with combat. For lack of a good way of describing it, these levels are kind of like the early Traveler's Tales Lego games, running down a corridor, smacking up some dudes, then running further down that corridor, all with a fixed camera angle to give that nice cinematic feel. The Two Towers levels are far more stationary in nature. They will frequently have you defending a single location from wave after wave of enemy, rather than doing something like navigating through a forest. It's a nice bit of variety and makes a great contrast to the first half of the game's more adventurous tone. One small thing that I appreciated is that this game lacked obnoxious collectibles. There's occasionally a branching path you can go down to grab a chest with bonus experience, but outside of that, nothing. No random colorful gems or baubles sitting on your screen just taking up space that plagues so many games of this type, and ditching them helps enhance that cinematic feel I mentioned earlier. In between these levels, you can actually unlock a whole lot of bonus behind-the-scenes content about both the games and the films they're based on. This is the kind of in-game extra I can really get behind. I wish including stuff like this was standard. Featured within these behind-the-scenes clips are a lot of the actors from the films, who lended their ability to voice act within the game. They even had some footage of Ian McKellen here trying to feign interest in a video game for the promotion. It's adorable stuff. One cool thing that I noticed was that some of the in-game footage in these promos is utilizing an earlier build of the game with a different UI. That's pretty cool. I've mainly talked about the game's positives so far, but there are a few small gripes that made the game less than perfect. Most notably, the lack of checkpoints. At most, you may get a checkpoint before the final boss of a given level. Other than that, good luck. More often than not, I found that death greeted me with restarting the entire level. There were a few times I just had to walk away from the game and come back because of how little I wanted to do the same level over and over. The level up system can also get kind of restrictive. Since each character levels up independently, you may find yourself in a situation where it's preferable to stick to one character for the whole game and level him up to the extreme, so you're ready for the late game challenges. Otherwise, your characters may end up being underleveled. I ended up playing Aragorn exclusively by the time I was halfway through the game because of this fact. I think it's probably also worth mentioning that this game's ending is basically just an advertisement for the next game in the series, which would come out a year later. Not the worst thing in the world, but it does prevent this game from feeling like a singular and complete experience. When you're done with the game, there's still some stuff you can do in the way of bonus missions. There are character-specific gauntlets you can go through in order to unlock a final secret character. Oof, I hope it's Gandalf. So, the final challenge to unlock the secret character is a wave-based combat room, or at least it was for Aragorn, who I was playing as. Thankfully, they give you a bit of health back after each wave, otherwise I'd have been toast. Take a look at how intense this final wave was. 3 giant dudes running around trying to club me to death. Look at how little HP I have. I ended up abusing the fact that enemies can strike each other in order to edge out the victory. Yeah, it's a little cheesy, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Alright, and the secret character is Isildur. Yeah, I guess I should have seen that one coming. We played as him during the introduction sequence after all. Kind of a lame send-off gift, seeing as how he's just a beefed-up, fully leveled version of Aragorn, which is exactly what I was playing as anyway, but what are you gonna do? All in all, Lord of the Rings Two Towers is definitely an enjoyable licensed game. It's worth a play even if you're not a fan of the property, due to how well it sticks to its core combat and doesn't muddle the experience with anything else. If you guys like what you saw here, please please consider liking and subscribing to let me know. I'm always looking for recommendations on what games to play and review next, so feel free to leave suggestions in the comments below. Till the next video, peace.